today we have an article here. I wanted to cover some news on OpenAI. For those that don't know, this is an American company that competes with a Chinese company called DeepSeek. Do you want to?
Yeah, people call it like the American DeepSeek, basically.
Yeah, it's the American DeepSeek.
It's the American DeepSeek.
Very similar to ChatGPT, except it struggles to talk about Tiananmen Square.
Yeah.
So.
But of course, if you've been listening to the show, you've seen, you've heard many deep dives. We've probably spent 3 hours talking about DeepSeek at this point. But Ben Thompson dropped a new update on Stratechery, and we're going to go through it. So to review his conclusion on OpenAI, he has some criticism of the company, specifically around speed of innovation, which is interesting. And his thesis is basically like, all the crazy nonprofit, effective altruism, all the fear mongering around AI doomerism, that really held us back. And this is what we get for that. Yeah. Meanwhile, like, no one is causing an AI panic over DeepSeek. People are like, oh, cool, they use floating point 8 instead of FP32. Like, it's like, oh, it's so much more efficient. Like, it's going to be able to, like, review my, homework faster. Yeah. And that's it. It's not like, everyone's saying it's an incredible jump. No one's saying it's more dangerous now. Yeah. And that's just a complete vibe shift from 2 years ago when everything was, I was reading my son, The Boy Who Cried Wolf, and nothing, like, the AI doomers really need to read that story because they've been like, GPT-1, this is going to kill us all. GPT-2, we're done for. GPT-3, it's completely over. It's never been more over. And now we're getting a new AI model every couple months. It's like, it could kill me, but I'm not going to listen to you.
Now people widely agree that we have AGI.
Yeah.
And it's ASI that we need, artificial superintelligence.
Yeah.
So the goalposts keep moving.
And so let's read from Ben's previous day conclusion. He says, that leaves America in a choice we have to make. We could, for very logical reasons, double down on defensive measures like massively expanding the chip ban and imposing a permission-based regulatory regime on chips and semiconductor equipment that mirrors the EU's approach to tech. Alternatively, we could realize that we have real competition and actually give ourselves permission to compete. Stop wringing our hands, stop campaigning for regulations. Indeed, go the other way and cut out all the cruft in our companies that has nothing to do with winning. If we choose to compete, we can still win. And if we do, we will have a Chinese company to thank. Yep. I like that because he's just so focused on just like, go, like competition. And just actually win there. So some folks read this as being simply about government regulations. And I did specifically mention the President Biden executive order on AI, which Trump has already repealed, but that misses the deeper point I was diving at. One of these intense frustrations of the last few years of the AI debate has been the Mott and Bailey aspect of the safety question. And this is funny because there's this AI doomer guy on X who always uses the Mott and Bailey like meme. Whenever someone's arguing with him, he's like, no, that's the Mott and Bailey. And now Ben Thompson's kind of like flipping it around. And so we'll break down like what that is because it's actually kind of odd. But I understand and grant the very real concerns about AI safety, which I think everyone does. There is some safety concerns, but that's the Mott in the safety argument. But the way that AI safety has too often manifested has been through the imposition of various cultural mores that roughly align with San Francisco politics.
Ouch.
That's the Bailey. Indeed, if you look again at the excerpt from OpenAI's GPT-2 announcement that I linked to yesterday, it's right there in the first sentence. Due to concerns about large language models being used to generate deceptive, biased, or abusive language at scale, we are only releasing a much smaller version of GPT-2 along with sampling code. We are not releasing the dataset training code or GPT-2 model weights. So this is the moment that OpenAI decided to stop open sourcing everything. Yeah. And the reason was we believe that our release strategy limits the initial set of organizations who may choose to do this and gives the AI community more time to have a discussion about the implications. So they were worried about generating deceptive, biased, or abusive language. So and then Ben says, first off, deceptive, biased, or abusive language is not a human extinction level danger. Yeah. So you've said, hey, we got to lock this down because it's going to paperclip us.
And then historically, we've dealt with bots trying to influence public opinion at scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not. Are we good, Ben?
Cool.
Cut for a second. Historically, it hasn't been this intelligent bot who's having a conversation. It's more these bots that are spamming comments being like, I think America's bad.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's literally just copy pasting.
That's deceptive and biased.
Totally.
And, doing the same things. I think one thing that OpenAI has always balanced is clearly they want to win.
Yeah.
Sam enjoys the competition but loves winning.
Mm-hmm.
He even said on television, I think about a year ago at this point, nobody could ever compete with us. Like he's on the record being, saying
I don't know
nobody is. I saw it was shown on like Entertainment Tonight, like some random television, but it was from some event he was at. So he said nobody can compete with us. That's obviously not true. They also have used this pending looming doom. We're creating this all-power intelligence as a marketing and capital raising strategy to basically create this aura around the company of we are creating
the most powerful
intelligence.
thing.
We're creating this powerful being that's more powerful than humanity, and you have to trust us to control it. So historically, I think some of this stuff, due to concerns about large language models playing into that narrative, but then also saying, well, we have the power.
Yeah. I do wonder, like there are so many different people around the table. Like a lot of this language was clearly driven by the previous OpenAI administration, essentially, like the nonprofit board. Like some of those people were really, really crazy. And for a while it felt like, even though Eliezer Yudikowsky wasn't tied to OpenAI, it felt like he was almost like an informal
the puppet master.
It felt like he was like an informal spokesperson for a while. And now it's like he's completely out of the picture. Yeah. But it was like, oh, if Eliezer says something, like OpenAI is going to have to respond because like it's really critical that we like take him seriously. And now it's been kind of, we've moved past that. And so second, who decides what is deceptive, biased, or abusive? And third, whatever your position on these questions, I think we can all agree that a tremendous amount of time and effort has been devoted to arguing about these cultural war issues and implementing one side or the other of them. And by definition, that time has an opportunity cost. More broadly, I think it is completely valid to argue that a lot of time and energy in tech has been devoted to many things other than actual tech. And that's the justification for that lack of focus has been rooted.
I would actually be interested how many tens of millions or potentially hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on their safety team annually. Like it could easily be somewhere in the range of $50 to $100 million that's just being spent on people that are a part of the safety apparatus, which Ben is basically putting in the culture war bucket. Yeah. Like almost classifying them as making them like a DEI org.
Yeah. What's interesting is so he goes on to talk about the O1 chain of thought and how when they launched O1 in comparison to R1 tells you everything it's thinking and just dumps it out, and it's open source. So even if it didn't, you could still see every single token that it's thinking about. And that's turned out to be a great UI pattern. We've talked about this. It's like, it's just really reassuring to the user. But when OpenAI launched O1, they said they believe that a hidden chain of thought presents a unique opportunity for monitoring models. Assuming it's faithful and legible, the hidden chain of thought allows us to read the mind of the model and understand its thought process. And this was the thing where I went to O1, asked it to summarize a book, and one of the hidden chain of thought sections was copyright infringement. So it thought internally about is it okay for me to share the contents of this book? Cool. And it decided yes. And so there's
a little bit of a bad boy,
there's that
Ross.
Yeah. And then there's also the fact that so they were also thinking about hiding the chain of thought so that people couldn't steal it and use it to train their model, basically. Yeah. And if they have some interesting thing in there, they can kind of tuck that behind the scenes and just give you a better answer. But this exposed chain of thought from R1 has clearly won out on the day, and I think
Consumers
we'll see other models
like
shipped. Yeah, users like it.
That was the only UI change that people cared about or talked about with the DeepSeek launch was that exposed chain of thought.
Everything was either a copy, even just the fact that you have the chats on the side, where the buttons are laid out is a verbatim copy of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Many
Down
of the features
the API, the way the API works.
Many of them are actually degraded features. You can't click a button just to talk to it. There's no voice mode at all. It doesn't have a lot of features yet. But exposed chain of thought is like the fundamental UI pattern breakthrough. And so exposed chain of thought teaches users how to do better prompting because they can see exactly where the AI gets confused. It increases trust in the model because you gain an understanding of how it's arriving at the answer. And it's just cool and endearing. One thing that was interesting with the normie discovery of R1 is how delightful they found the experience. And so Ben understands OpenAI's competitive concerns, but the existence of R1 has shown that locking down chain of thought perhaps didn't matter so much. More generally, the consideration of competitive concerns gets back to my overall critique that the U.S. approach to competition is too rooted in stopping and blocking would-be competitors instead of out-innovating them.
Yeah.
And this was the thing where, like, remember when we went back to that Ilya working on A-Star, and the framing around that was absolute panic. I remember there were fake news articles about OpenAI. This was almost 2 years ago, we said, right? It was a year and a half ago, or maybe a year and 3 months ago. And they said, A-Star is so good. It solved every foundational like math problem, and it also broke encryption.
Yeah.
And so they were like, they have an AI model that can break encryption. So they're just going to like, Bitcoin should go to zero because they broke an encryption. And it was like, obviously not true, but people were just so insane about it. And internally, it seemed like a lot of people were maybe just using it for internal politics and like, oh, is this dangerous? Like, why are we moving so fast? The nonprofit folks having a big problem with it. And then O1 just throws it, or R1 just comes out and throws it out there. And it's like, yeah, it's basically fine.
Yeah.
Very funny.
Yeah, it's kind of the most savage founders that I know will, when they're fundraising, they'll take a PDF export of their deck and they'll share it with anybody that's like remotely like interested in what they're doing or relevant in some way. And then the founders that are sort of afraid of competition, kind of lock their decks down. They put emails, authentication and passwords on their deck, and then they usually end up just like not being the actual like winner in the category. Yeah. And so it's the same thing here where we should just be really focused on
innovation,
winning, innovation, being at the edge, understanding that people are going to reverse engineer everything good that gets done in the world. That's been the case for every technology, and things will get copied one way or another.
And this was kind of the weird critique that I saw once the Sam Altman like haters got really emboldened. They would make the claim that Sam Altman is like non-technical and has never done anything good and is not responsible for any innovation in AI. Like the transformer was invented at Google. He didn't invent the transformer. He just like popularized it. But then simultaneously they'll argue that they'll quote the OpenAI board that criticized Sam for launching ChatGPT too quickly without informing the board. Do you remember this whole thing? It was like as evidence of Sam like moving recklessly with regard to AI safety. He just tweeted out ChatGPT one day, and it's like, well, which is it? Like he can't be both. He can't both have no impact and also create the most dominant product and drive it forward and actually get it out in the world.
If you're thinking about OpenAI as a business, him tweeting it out and getting to 100 million users in however was it weeks.
It's fantastic.
It's clearly was the right decision to just go. Yeah. If you're thinking about it from a nonprofit safety org lens, you should have waited a year. You should have tested more. Yeah. Should have put more guardrails up. You should have rolled it out slowly. There's a number of things that. Yeah. And so I kind of see it as like there is a world where Sam was fighting like an internal or like the nonprofit culture war, like a longhouse type environment that was saying like, no, don't release products, don't move fast, don't innovate, don't do anything that could be risky because they're so terrified of what they're building. Yeah. And he's looking at it and he's like, actually, this is fine as a chatbot. Let's just get it out there and see what happens. Yeah. And that was the right decision. But there's still that impulse internally to say, hey, maybe we should lock this down a little bit more. And so there's an interesting discussion right now. Is this a Sputnik moment or a Google moment? And so Ishan Wong, who is, I think, the CEO of Reddit, says, Sputnik showed that the Soviets could do something the U.S. couldn't, a new fearsome power. They didn't subsequently publish all the technical details in half the blueprints. They only showed that it could be done. With DeepSeek, if I recall correctly, a lab in Berkeley read their paper and duplicated the claimed results on a small scale within a day. That's why I say this is like the Google moment in 2004. Google filed its S1 in 2004 and revealed to the world that they had built the largest supercomputer cluster by using distributed algorithms to network together commodity computers at the best performance per dollar on the cost curve. And
famously, Google's was massively profitable when they went public, and every VC is like, why can't we have more Googles? Because the financials were so fantastic. This was in contrast to every other tech company of the day during the dot-com boom, who at that point just bought what were essentially larger and larger mainframes, always at the most expensive leading edge of the cost curve. And so Ben says it's hard to overstate what a favor DeepSeek did to basically everyone by open sourcing their model and explaining exactly how they accomplished what they did. They could have, and from a geopolitical perspective, arguably should have kept all their progress a secret, even as China built drastically more efficient AI infrastructure.
You know the narrative that they are a hedge fund, this was a side project, and so they just released it short, opened a massive short against
That's
NVIDIA,
a funny one,
and then made, they could have made how many tens of billions of dollars off of that short, right?
There are so many theories here.
It is a fun theory.
Yeah.
And there is a world where that was exactly the strategy, is like they were building models internally to run their investing. And then they realized, hey, we can train a model and we can throw up a clone of ChatGPT.
Yep.
And if we pay to get it number one in the App Store, we can tank the markets
NVIDIA
on Monday and get, make like an entire career's worth of,
it's definitely a tinfoil hat theory, but but I'm interested. I'm listening. I'm listening.
I'm not saying
totally.
I'm not saying it.
I mean, Palmer just cited that in a post that we'll go through later, and it's not as crazy as it sounds. There were some people pushing back, and he had some very good responses to those things.
Yeah.
So then he moves to a tweet from Rune, who says, "This is not the right lesson. There is an opportunity cost to researcher time, and if they're spending it micro optimizing PTX to make the best of limited comms, like the memory communication bandwidth, that's something else they weren't doing. Nerfing some aspect of the hardware is never a benefit. The most dangerous," and then Ben says, "The most dangerous lure about thinking in terms of comparative advantage is how time and learning curves lead you to consequences that you never considered when you made the decision. I wrote about this exactly last year in A Chance to Build. I started the post by describing how US semiconductor companies kicked off outsourcing to Asia and tied that to the fact that Apple can't make an iPhone in the US. And so Steve Jobs famously said, it's not even a matter of price. It's just there are not 30,000 manufacturing engineers in the United States. There are not 30,000 manufacturing engineering jobs to be filled. This is because the structure of the world economy, choices made starting with Bretton Woods in particular and cemented by the removal of tariffs over time, made them non-viable." And so connect this to Google. What if Google had taken Rune's advice and not wasted the time of valuable researchers in transforming how data centers are built? Perhaps they could have waited until Alibaba did it a decade later and rented capacity. And in the meantime, they would have been a far smaller and less significant company specifically, and the entire US tech industry would have been similarly stunted generally. To be fair to Rune, he does seem to be talking narrowly about the specific optimizations that DeepSeek made to overcome the H800's nerfed memory bandwidth, but I think the critique holds more generally. US tech companies, including OpenAI, have clearly, in retrospect, been NVIDIA's willing suckers, happy to pay for more capacity instead of wringing out their own. How many years would it have taken them to discover DeepSeek breakthroughs?
This is a classic. If you're trying to scale anything really quickly, do anything really fast, you just end up paying more for it. So you hire somebody and you just say, we'll pay you, $20,000 a year more than we budgeted for the role because we need the role. Or you're trying to buy billboards quickly and you say, we're going to pay 30% premium, but we want to launch this now because there's this competitive pressure. So what these US firms have been doing is not exactly out of the ordinary. It's just the nature of trying to do things fast as you just focus on speed versus efficiency and cost.
Yep. And so he closes talking about aggregation theory, says, on the flip side, non-reasoning LLMs are still great at producing content, and they also get smaller by distilling the output of reasoning models. One of the big R1 takeaways is that you can infuse reasoning into normal LLMs. More than that, though, you can also use them to generate massive amounts of synthetic data that simply teach the normal LLMs the answer to an effectively infinite number of questions. And of course, reasoning could end up simply being effectively free. One announcement that I should have added to yesterday's post was Google's announcement of Gemini 2.0 flash thinking, that it appears to be competitive with R1. The China is crushing U.S. rhetoric today forgets about Gemini 2.0 flash thinking, likely cheaper, longer context, and better on reasoning. We're still early in the AI race. So this was like completely missed.
Yeah.
But we don't know the prices
yet. Can you believe
yet.
that Google owns search and YouTube and they basically have every mainstream media company by the balls, and they can't even get news out on a week?
It is crazy. Their product sense is just so bad, and they have this whole problem.
And their
with
marketing sense now.
It's like, is it Gemini or is it Bard, or they've been renaming models left and right, and it's clearly they're shipping their org chart because they had Google Brain and then DeepMind, and they finally merged them, but they're still just like I know what Google is. Google is a search engine. I know what ChatGPT is. ChatGPT is a chatbot.
Yeah.
Like Google Gemini 2.0 flash thinking, like how do I even access that? I tried to get Gemini set up. I finally figured it out.
Sounds like an internal project.
I went to Gemini, and then I had to upgrade to Gemini Advanced, and then I got access to the 1.5 model. But I was even asking the model, like, what are your capabilities? And it didn't know. Like, it was like not telling me how to do it.
That should be one of a new benchmark for models. You should be able to.
What's your context window? What version am I on? How do I upgrade?
You're
take my money.
Interviewing for a role, and somebody asks, so what are you good at? What do you do? And you don't have a good answer for it. That's kind of a tough sell.
Yeah. And so Google is a company that actually cares about and has invested in infrastructure, and perhaps doesn't see the need for software type of margins OpenAI and Anthropic have allegedly been earning on their API. So I wouldn't be surprised if they are very competitive. Of course, they're not open source, but again, R1 is I can get all the thinking I want locally for free. This isn't necessarily dispositive in terms of the long-term prospects for aggregation theory, but given that the entire history of technology has been defined by processing speed simultaneously increasing, even as it decreases in price, the burden of proof is probably on those who say that zero marginal costs are an aberration. And so he's saying that, like, in the long term, all of these models will be optimized to the point where they're zero marginal cost. Yeah. And at that point, being the entry point and being able to tax that is really valuable. And so there's a couple posts that we'll go into during the timeline that say, oh, this is massively bullish for Apple because all of a sudden the inference gets super cheap, gets much better, can be done on the edge, baked down. They don't need to mess around with any of the actual training or inference themselves. They can just throw it on the phone and it's there and it's great.
Yeah.
And same with Google and Facebook. They're saying it's really good for Facebook because they can just chuck this in and they don't need to worry about, playing the model race.
Yeah.
But fascinating story. It continues to evolve.
Ben
Stay
Thompson,
tuned.
staying competitive.
Goated.